Hey guys, so I just finished the CSET portion of my exam and I thought I would share some details on how you should study for it. What you kind of need to know, what you don't really need to know. Just general information, nothing specific. No, I'm not going to share any test questions or anything with you. So just going into it, the first thing I would say is that you need to be able to subnet very well. That's something that anyone that talks about this will tell you is that, oh, just know how to subnet very well. Well, what they really mean is that about a quarter to a third of the questions involve subnetting. So the only thing I'll add to this is that you need to be able to subnet quickly. You need to be able to subnet any kind of question within 3 minutes, And that's because, time constraints are going to be a problem on this test. Do not go in cocky. Go in, get into the exam, and be like, okay, question done, next question. And question done, next question. Don't procrastinate. That's how you screw yourself on time, because what can happen is that you can get halfway through, think that you're ahead by 15 minutes, then you get 2 or 3 lab questions or simulator questions, and then all of a sudden you're down by 30 minutes and you've got 10 questions and 5 minutes left, which don't say, oh, that won't happen to me, because that's what I said, and then that's what happened to me my first time around. And that's the only reason I kind of screwed up my first time taking the test, was because I ran out of time. So time is definitely a concern, and keep that in mind. Let's see. So as for some of the other stuff you should study, what I would study for, which they don't really tell you in the book, but which is very important, is you need to know the show commands. You don't really need to configure stuff, but you do need to know how to read the, you need to be able to go into the running config and tell me everything that the running config does. You need to be able to, you need to know what like show version does and show controller, what show controller does, and like what show int. You need to be able to read everything in show int, and you need to know what like show IP int brief does. So just know your show commands. That's very important. That's not something they really talk about in the books, but that's what you're really going to be doing in these simulation portions. Now, this is the big part, and this is the part where I basically tell you what you don't need to study for the exam, because this is stuff that isn't going to be asked on the exam. So first of all, you're not going to be asked to actually configure anything. And that'll save you a bunch of time, because you don't need to know how to configure a DHCP. You don't need to know how to configure SSH. You don't need to know how to configure OSPF. You don't need to know how to configure RIP. I guess you kind of need to know a little bit about static routes, but in general, you won't be asked to configure anything on this exam. What you will be asked is you'll be asked questions about OSPF and RIP and all this stuff. You're going to be asked like, oh, in this diagram, what path would OSPF take? What path would RIP take? What's the difference between classful and classless routing? What's the difference between RIP version 2 and RIP version 1? What's just, they're going to ask you basically general questions about, what RIP and everything else does. They're going to ask you general questions about, what PAT and NAT and all that stuff is, but they're not going to ask you to basically go in and configure PAT or configure NAT or configure any of this stuff, So that's something that will save you a lot of time. You just basically need to read through some of the commands that are shown in the in the book, but you don't actually need to know how to configure a lot of this stuff. So that'll take a lot of time off your studying. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, one other thing I would mention is that you need to be able to I'm not sure what book you're reading, but in my Lamney book, the first couple of chapters were very important. Knowing the OSI layer, and knowing what every layer is, and knowing what you need to know what the OSI layers are. You need to know what the DoD layers are. You need to know what TCP-IP layers are. So just know all of that very well. That's very important, because you'll be asked questions like, what layer is CDP on? What layer is OSPF on? You're going to be asked questions about what kind of stuff is on what layer. So just memorize the layers. Those are important. You're most likely going to see at least 1 or 2 questions about the OSI layers. So yeah, I think that's about all I wanted to say. I know that they're going to be moving to the 3.0 exam in about, you know, couple of days on August 20th, but I feel like some of this information will probably still be relevant. Some of it probably won't, but most of it probably will be. So yeah, hope this helps you guys out.